morning. We're so grateful to Janie for inviting us all right into the heart of your life. And I can't wait to hear all of the stories of our season of hope that we've been sharing as a congregation and how those are rippling out into the world for people to surf on. I'm Kelly Thompson, and I'm one of the ministers at NBUC that's been working with the congregational care team. And today, as we are creating a new well of hope for the world, I pray that if you're here today, like some of the baptism families with babies, and you're just hoping to remember one day what sleep is, and, you know, for those who are a little bit older, like Ethan, that you'll feel that blessing, that hand of blessing upon you, that there'll be days when just mysteriously you'll remember those words and the water and the way that God called us good in the beginning. Maybe today you're hoping to turn a new page in your life. Maybe you're just hoping that this week will bring more good days than bad. And maybe you're here today not sure what you're hoping. Maybe it's been a long time since you've hoped anything. And our prayer today is that that we will each have whispered into us, like, you know, those little baby ears this morning, that we'll each find a brand new hope that is so moving. It's like we've been waiting our whole life. We've been holding our breath to be touched by that hope. And our prayer is that you may find an opportunity today to have that hope be something that gets to be heard out loud, even if it's just you and God in the room at the time that hears it. So we're gathering up all of that hope together today as we sink into our Romans 8 passage. And we're just, actually, I'm going to invite us, if we can have it up on the screen, let's say it together. I invite you to join with me. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to God's purpose. He also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And those he predestined, God also called. Those God called, God also justified. And those God justified, God also glorified. What then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? There's a lot of words in those passage, in that passage, like predestined, sanctified, justified, glorified. Those are kind of tough words to get our heads and hearts wrapped around. So I want to begin with story today, and a story about a woman that I visited recently in the hospital, and she'd had a very long journey with health struggles, and at one point she didn't know that she was going to make it. And miraculously, she did pull through. And as we were having a conversation one day, we were talking about something really simple, and she said, when I get home, and went on, and then she stopped herself. And there was this spark in her eye as she said to me, I'm going to go home. I'm going to make it. And it was like this hope that she had been estranged from just surprised her and welled up in her with so much ease, like a friend landing on the doorstep. And it was so amazing to actually see hope lost and found in the blink of an eye, to see it written all over her face. And in that moment, she her reality was changed simply by that hope tumbling out. And she was drawing her homecoming to her. And thinking about how hope gets restored like that, when I was coming to today, it makes me wonder if hope really does get lost. Or is it more like sometimes we lose sight of it and we lose track of it? Do we close our hearts to it because it hurts too much to get our hopes up and go down that road again and again? But the raw human reality that we have all experienced in different ways and in different intensities is that we do lose hope. Somewhere between the end of our rope, where our hope takes us, and where God's hope picks up where we leave off and goes on, there is sometimes this chasm that we just can't seem to cross. We look in the mirror and we forget what we look like because the person staring back at us is unrecognizable. We forget how far we've come, and we forget how far God is ready to take us. When we lose heart, when we lose hope, I think it's a many-layered loss that runs deep with us, because we're also losing what we have built our life around. We are losing what we have invested ourselves in. We've bet the farm on it, and our hope has become this guiding principle that pervades every choice and decision we make, even whether to get out of bed in the morning. And when we lose our hopes, sometimes it becomes a catch-22 that it gets harder to open ourselves again. How many of you have heard yourself say recently, I don't want to get my hopes up? Yeah, it's that tightrope that we walk and that God is holding on to as well. But what the worship team, when we talked, when they talked, really wanted to acknowledge is that we don't always know God is hanging on to the tightrope, and it brings us right bumping into that big why question about why, when we our faith is that with God anything is possible and that God creates miracles every day. Why does God let our hopes get lost? And why does it feel sometimes like when our hopes falter that God is way on the other side of them instead of picking up the broken pieces and trying to make something new of that puzzle with us? Perhaps that's what's so important about our hopes giving way, is that we come kind of empty-handed and with a little bit of abandon to stare into that question. And in our question, there's a quest. We are seeking God without really even knowing it from a new place. I wanted to share my own story with you today of hopes lost and found again. And it's not really a story of like hope hanging in a life and death balance. It's just kind of like the nitty-gritty of everyday stuff that we go through. And it comes from our family vacation that we were on last week. And I love my family because we've definitely learned how to be perfectly imperfect together. We are a truly dysfunctional bunch. And we know it. There's something good about knowing it. And we came up with this crazy experiment of spending big blocks of time together under one roof that we decided to make a go of. And so a car trip to Atlanta. And there was, we quickly discovered there was some bad trip karma that was getting kicked up. And my stepdad landed in hospital a couple of days before we got there, and things worked out okay for him. And there were a bunch of other things: lost cell phones, airport layovers, our favorite wing place in all of Atlanta was closed. when our mouths were watering for it. All small things, but when you throw in family dynamics and buttons that get pushed and sideline remarks that sting, a few days in, we were into full family drama. And people got hurt. And we quickly realized it was the kind of hurt that could last longer than the trip. And I started to lose hope. I started to think things like, maybe we hadn't gotten past our past. And maybe that wouldn't even be possible for my family. And maybe I really didn't know how to forgive because I couldn't quite see what the next steps were in that process. And it was with those hopes kind of coming apart at the seams that a few of us went to church on Sunday. And as we were moving into the sanctuary, a few amazing things happened. My brother-in-law, Mike, he just kind of took me aside and said, Kelly, I just woke up this morning and I knew it was going to be okay. And I decided to let this thing go. I'm not going to hold it over him. I'm going to forgive because that's the kind of person I want to be. And I hope I can do it. And just like that, and there was that spark of hope renewed, like I had seen in the woman that I talked to you about earlier. And then the pastor, he started off the service with this beautiful scripture passage and talked about how we try to set our lives up to be stress-free and challenge-free. But he said it's not really what we're called to as Christians. And it was just like he was speaking right into the bare bones of what we were experiencing. And then we sang a hymn that had those words that we read together from Romans 8. If God is for us, who can be against us? And then my mom, she found this little devotional and she turned randomly to a page. And this word encouragement had been bubbling up all through the service, kind of woven in like a marker stone. And there was the word, like it was especially for my mom that day, along with the passage that the pastor had started us off with. And it just felt like God's divine hope seeping in a way that we could never muster ourselves. And it reminds me of another part of Romans, verse 24 to 25, that we explored a couple of weeks ago. I just keep coming back to it. For in hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes in what is seen? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. And so maybe it's important that our hopes break apart and stretch and expand when our hopes are for what we see and what we know, when our hopes are attached to opportunities, to cures, to outcomes, when our hopes are what we are clinging to with a closed fist. God's hopes, the hope that God breathed into us when we were born, that kind of hope doesn't have a handle. It doesn't have a grip for us to, white-knuckled be grasping. That kind of hope has wings. And so it's a divine hope that God has always held for us. And that kind of divine hope is not lost even when ours is. And the words that really kind of get at that for me come from the Message. And I just want to share that with you now because it just really brings it home. The building blocks of this divine hope, because it's so big and lofty, right? How do we get to that with words like predestined and sanctified and glorified? These words really speak to us. God knew what God was doing from the very beginning. God decided from the outset to shape the lives of those who love him along the same lines as the life of the Son. The Son stands first in the line of humanity God restored, and we see the original and intended shape of our lives there in him. After God made that decision of what his children should be like, he followed it up by calling people by name, just as we did with our children at the baptism font. After God called them by name, God set them on a solid basis with himself. And then after getting them established, God stayed with them to the end, gloriously completing what God had begun. This is divine hope. And I just really feel like it's important to really get at, like, sink our teeth into what is essentially hopeful about Jesus when we are in the groaning place that Romans talked about and grace is still a far off horizon. What is it that gets us to have more hope than just kind of getting through the suffering part? And this is not biblically exegetical, it's not theologically sound, it's just how I see it. When Jesus was on his knees in the garden and he prayed, Father, if there is any way for this cup of suffering to pass from me, was there somewhere in between that moment and when he prayed, not my will, but yours be done, that he lost hope and found it again? Was there a moment on the cross when he prayed, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing? Somewhere in between that moment and when he prayed, Father, why have you forsaken me? That he lost hope and found it again. And so God is enlarged because Jesus went into the depths of our hopes lost and resurrected them. And Jesus gets it and still gets it every day that we decide what we are going to die to and rise to. Jesus is still there, breathing hope into us. And so God gives us this day the power to be experts in hope. As we gathered and shared baptismal vows today, what we're really doing is saying that we need each other to be bearers of divine hope. And when we reach the bottom of our well, that we know there's going to be someone there to shine that flashlight into the bottom and show us the cracks that are weeping with the moisture of new hope, of all the water that is surrounding the earth around that well. And so as we come together today, whether we are negative Nellies or people who look at the world through rose-colored glasses, we are God's divine hope. Hope begins in the dark. We wait, we watch, we work. God does not give up. Thanks be to God.